This simply means that storage is must. Whenever renewable energy can be produced at any point of time. Sun is not shining all the time. Wind is not blowing all the time. So essentially, it's a discontinuous source of energy. So storage is must to prevent wastage of renewable energy. Especially because of the fact that renewables not only is it's getting wasted, but also it is getting integrated in the grid directly. So it causes instability for the grid as well. Now, in India today, there is approximately 120 gigawatt of solar installed capacity today, and we are anticipating it to be approximately 175 gigawatt by the end of 2022. And this would require approximately 20 gigawatt hour of storage. As per India's aim of achieving net zero really fast, we are anticipating that 500 gigawatt of solar will come by 2030, and that would require approximately 100 gigawatt hour of energy storage. Now, it's of course a big market, but that's a huge capex that renewable developers will have to do, power companies will have to do to build the storage capacity so that they can prevent this wastage of power. Now, there's another question that is generally asked, that what if we let it waste because it's anyways renewable, we are not anyways causing any, the production is green, and if we let it waste, there's not much repercussion out of it. There is a very big repercussion, which is curtailment. So essentially what you're doing is, how the power market works is that you essentially are putting energy into the grid, and it is upon the grid operator to accept the energy or not. So essentially, by the virtue of price in a fluctuating market, energy which may be inexpensive, if it is easier to waste the energy, if it is inexpensive to waste the energy, the discoms and the grid operators can choose to let it go to waste. So essentially, curtailment causes a very big impact on renewable segment. On one hand, where renewable energy is getting cheaper to produce in comparison to coal. On the other hand, because it is growing and there is no storage, the price point at which renewable developers can sell this energy to the market is also getting reduced, just so that they can let grid operators allow them to put energy on the grid even when the grid doesn't need it. So this creates a very big curtailment issue. Now, what the net outcome of this whole scenario is that today energy production has 50% emissions impact in India, despite of the fact that 25% of our energy is coming through renewables, because 50 to 60% of curtailment is happening. And that is because today we have only even less than 1 gigawatt hour of energy storage, while we need 20 gigawatt hour of energy storage. Now, there is another way storage can be built. It can be aggregated from idle EVs. You have your EV is essentially 50% battery. Your EV, whenever it is not working, it's a battery on wheels, and you can essentially plug it back into the grid and aggregate all the idle capacity from the EVs and provide a storage facility to power players, renewable developers, discoms, so that without building the energy storage that is required, they have a scalable system which they can use to not let the power go to waste, not let the curtailment happen, and make renewable integration into the grid sustainable. Now, why that is possible? Because there's another very interesting Pareto with transportation. This is how the transportation looks. We essentially have two peaks of load in transportation, one in morning and one in evening. That is when most of the people are commuting from their homes to offices. So these are the two big peaks. So essentially, you have the transportation segment, which is coincidentally idle when the storage is needed. So the market already has that capability to provide this facility to energy market. Now, in India, there are approximately 3 million EVs today. What we are anticipating, and as a conservative estimate, by 2030, there will be 60 million EVs. Today, there are 99% EVs are two-wheelers and three-wheelers. And the trend we are anticipating will continue. 95% of the 60 million EVs by 2030 will be two-wheelers and three-wheelers. And our approach is very straightforward, that aggregate the idle time via battery swap. So essentially, that is what we are up to. That is where our battery swapping piece comes into the play, where we have been giving battery swapping services to e-rickshaws. We are essentially aggregating the largest EV category in India today, which stands at 2 million. Which basically has the capability of providing enough battery capacity when they are idle, that can cover for approximately 20 to 30% of the energy storage requirement of India today. Now, let me share some more stats and some more information about how we are achieving it, what is our roadmap, and how do we see the regulatory environment working out. Anirudh, can I share my
Yeah, which one? You should be able to.
Yeah. So now I'll just take a minute to introduce the team. At Sheru, we are 3 founders, me, Nakul, and Shikhar. I think Shikhar is also joining us on this call. We basically started out a journey. We are BITS Pilani grads, graduated in 2015. And after that, we worked in this startup called Grey Orange Robotics. That is where we draw a lot of experience of working on decentralized systems. At Grey Orange, we primarily worked on building automated robotic systems for these very large warehouses that are being used by Amazon, Flipkart, and other e-commerce giants that essentially use only robots to move goods entirely in their warehouses. So building the energy management systems out there, building the goods movement systems out there is essentially a decentralized problem statement itself. So we have done these things. We have been joined in our journey by significantly experienced mobility and EV experts in India today. We have Miss Ellie on board with us, Advantage on board with us. We have been fortunate enough to get support from several angel networks as well. And we were fortunate enough to get a small grant from Mercedes-Benz as well via Willgrow to build this out. Now, essentially what we have done is that the battery swapping station that is going into the ecosystem for aggregating e-rickshaws, two-wheelers, and three-wheelers, we have built it in a manner that it has the capability of putting the power back on the grid. And this system is patented with us, but ideally it has a very huge impact for the overall ecosystem because this gives the ability of creating a distributed network of batteries, which is not only functioning to provide pay-per-use mobility to electric two-wheelers and three-wheelers, creating a network and giving that facility to them, but is also acting as a decentralized storage for the power industry. Essentially, how it is working is that there are 2 pieces to it. One is a POS, which we are giving to the retailers so that they can start providing battery swapping services to the market around them. Battery swapping has gotten significant amount of traction recently. And I think we are going to anticipate a really good move from central government really soon, where interoperability in battery swapping is also going to come out. So essentially we are about to enter into a time where a lot of battery capacity is coming into India, especially from two-wheelers and three-wheelers, and all the networks will be able to work in synergy. So there would be less problem of fragmentation, less problem of network fragmentation, which can be basically reused for providing storage services to renewable players and renewable developers, discoms. And especially if we do not have advent of virtual power plants in India, but when they come in soon, this will basically act as a backend to them as well. Just a brief about how, I am sure you must have seen Tez Dukan earlier in the slide. So Tez Dukan is basically our model where we have sort of made this out of the box business model for retailers to start giving battery swapping services to an organized market. Our entire intent is that more and more people should come into battery swapping business. They should start providing these services from their existing retail outlets, from their existing small businesses, which in turn will create a required battery capacity for not only the mobility market, but also for the storage market. How it functions is it's a very straightforward platform. What we are doing is that we have basically created this multi-layered structure where we are sort of first enabling batteries to be able to communicate on the grid so that they can communicate what is their idle capacity available. Once that accounting is done, we basically do the dynamic allocation of all that capacity into batches to renewable power players so that they can use it as a single aggregated pool of battery capacity on their energy management systems. That's really simplified version of how exactly it is happening behind the scenes. Just to touch very briefly on the regulatory support for electric mobility, I think all of us are fairly aware of there is a very strong tailwind for electric mobility. But I think the 2-3 things which are extremely interesting for electric mobility and really important for us as well, and we see that that will really make the boom happen. Number one, the decoupling of battery from the vehicle essentially has allowed a lot of people to come up with those vehicle categories where probably significant amount of engineering is not required. All you need is a rudimentary vehicle, and whatever battery network is available in the market, you plug it in with that and start making the services available. And that is what we are seeing. Around 70 to 80% of two-wheelers and three-wheelers coming out in Indian market today are a long tail. So essentially, this move has fundamentally allowed more and more participants to come in the market and create two-wheeler and three-wheeler capacity in the market. That's one very interesting and very important move from the Ministry of Road Transport, which is sort of pushing for electric mobility. And another thing that is going to come out really soon, I've already touched upon it, interoperability is going to be extremely important for building out this kind of aggregated battery capacity, which can be used for alternate purposes as well. On one hand, the regulator is moving into electric mobility to regulate it, make it move faster, have some stake in it. On the other hand, the regulator is moving out of energy markets. We are going to see significant amount of deregulation happen in the next 2 years, where basically the responsibility of content, that is electricity and content and carriage, basically responsibility of moving electricity, this will be decoupled, which will allow the market also to get incentivized to waste less and less power, provide better quality services to the customer, and also allow newer business models, more innovative business models to come in and solve the problems of energy storage or any other problems from various other technological ways, rather than just one size fit all approach, which is exactly needed for a very decentralized and green grid. I think battery tech is something that we can completely skip. Yeah. So Anirudh, that's about it from my side. This is the information that I wanted to put across to the community. Anything that you'd like to add, like me to add, I'll just do that.
All right, that was awesome. Really quick overview, and thanks for keeping it succinct. We can just dive right into questions then.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have a couple, and then we'll dive into open questions from our audience as well. And while we're doing this, you can just keep dropping your questions into the chat box, and I'll call on you in the order that they really came in. We'll start on a macro level. There is a whole boom happening in electric mobility, right? So many players, which is a great thing. I think like the fact that there's so much creative entrepreneurship going on in this space, it's really inspiring. But what is the full stack that's actually going to build up, and how is it going to consolidate within that full stack? Right? Like energy is one, and energy production is one, energy storage is one, swapping and making those batteries available is one, the OEMs themselves, then the recycling, right? Like what is the entire full stack that's going to be a mature ecosystem that we can look forward to 3 to 4 to 5 years from now? And how will it consolidate into it?
Got it. I think that's a very loaded question. Let me just break it out into 2-3 parts. Number one, I think from a supply side, I think fundamentally, first of all, electric mobility has given the opportunity to the customer to express their need much more specifically. So typically in automotive markets, what you have is you have one Splendor, one Activa, which works for everything, right? So what you do is you make that cheaper and cheaper so that it can be used by masses. You make it more and more reliable so that it can be used by masses. But essentially, value engineering is happening on one SKU, and that is being propagated by scale, right? That's number one. Number two, that's a fundamental shift in electric mobility. In electric mobility, what you're going to see is more customized, more tailored products for each and every use case. Second thing is, in conventional automotive supply chain, the value chain, the role of a dealer was very set. Like 30% of their revenues were coming in from sales of vehicles, and 70% of the revenues were coming in from after sales services. So in an EV ecosystem and EV value chain, that 70% is something that is completely gone for the dealer now, and the OEM is also willing to sort of make the vehicle more and more reliable so that the vehicle doesn't require after sales services, right? The only service that essentially it might require is the battery, right? So essentially the role of dealership is also getting disrupted. So what you're going to see in electric mobility is a more fused experience for the customer. So probably what you're going to see is that because the after sales services is something that is not required, but battery has a very strong touch point with it, more and more lease-based models you will start seeing in mobility as such. So probably earlier it was ownership-based mobility. Now you will see more and more subscription-based mobility coming in because this entire stack is more and more interlinked with each other, right? Now comes the third thing: what kind of a country we are, right? So around 77% of the families in India are living at the bottom of the pyramid, right? You have your buses are the cheapest mode of commute, somewhere at what, 2 rupees per seat per kilometer. After that, the only cheapest mode of commute for you is 3 rupees per seat per kilometer. That's e-rickshaws. And e-rickshaws are primarily booming because of the fact that it is a rudimentary vehicle. All you had to do was bring in the kit from China, put it together, and whatever battery was available in your neighborhood, whatever battery service provider was available in your neighborhood, you just put the battery into the vehicle and started operating it, which is what basically allowed e-rickshaws to boom. While e-rickshaws as a category has a lot of problems in itself, government is actively working on, I mean, different bodies are working on solving each of those. Now we are at a point where e-rickshaws are regulated. You have a proper registration. So a lot of things are supposed to happen in e-rickshaws and they will happen. So regulator is coming in, or regulator is also trying to understand how to really control the quality of supply that is coming in without really throttling down the growth. Because e-rickshaws boomed like crazy. And if you want to go from 3 million EVs today to 60 million EVs by 2030, you need that boom to continue. You need the market to really express itself and do whatever it wants without compromising on public safety or security, right? So this is the biggest challenge for the regulator today, that how do you really ensure that the reliability is there, but do not throttle down the boom, right? So I think today when you see the electric two-wheeler market also, around 70% of the sales is coming from only 3 players, Hero Electric, Okinawa, Ampere, right? Run-of-the-mill products, not Olas, not Aethers, not Simple Energies, not an aspirational product. But they are not aiming for an aspirational product. They are aiming for a run-of-the-mill product which people can use in their at the bottom of the pyramid for every use case, right? So I think in the next 5 to 8 years, because we really want to boom really fast on electric mobility, what you will definitely see a lot of fragmentation, at least continuing till 2030, right? So and that is only possible when the OEM is also asking for one of the problems to be given away to someone else. So battery probably is one of the biggest components out there, and OEMs are also, the assemblers are also very much willing for the unorganized, for anyone else to take off the battery from their case. Because I mean, when you're trying to reduce the cost of the vehicle, you do not want to get involved in any after sales service, battery is a component which, if it is left to the market, you'll be really happy. You'll only work on your vehicle, try to reduce the cost furthermore, right? So and I think in line with this, a lot of oil companies will get into battery swapping, battery manufacturing. Energy companies will come into battery manufacturing and start creating that backend, start creating that supply chain, with which again the unorganized market will be strengthened. The distributed market, the end retail will be strengthened so that it can provide the battery swapping services. So we are also very actively working into making battery swapping more and more commoditized, so that every retailer, every wholesaler, every distributor who has already a shop can start earning from battery swapping, and it creates the right capacity in the market, which for electric mobility as well. I think I've tried to cover a lot of it.
Yeah, I know that's a very, very thorough answer for sure. Yeah. One last set of questions from me, and then we'll dive into the rest that are in the chat. At SusMafia, one of our core goals is to multiply the impact of sustainability entrepreneurs through goal-oriented collaborations. And that means enabling collaborations, right? Yeah. So what is, if I were to give you, the lens of 3-4 different stakeholders, and you have one ask you can make from each of them, what would they be? So in the first case, what is one thing you would ask of policymakers and regulators that would allow you to operate more efficiently and scale up faster?
So I'm only asking for one thing, that is deregulate the energy market ASAP, right? So today the injection point is 1 megawatt hour. If you want to make the storage available, connect it on the grid, your storage needs to be at least 1 megawatt hour. Some private players have been able to convince their respective state regulatory commissions to bring it down to 100 kilowatt hours, but it needs to come down to 10 kilowatt hours so that the commercial and industrial scale of EVs can be subsumed under the network and aggregated. So that's number one ask from our side to the stakeholder, right? And we want it to happen ASAP. Today, we already have rooftop in India. We already have the capability in the grid to be bidirectional. We already have the capability to be able to dispatch power on instruction. We already have the capability of open access on the grid. All we want from the regulator is move fast on it. You're already doing it. You're doing a great job. Just move fast on it and make it happen in the next 1 year itself. Otherwise, renewable growth, no matter what you do, you can keep adding the renewable into the grid, but the curtailment will keep on increasing and the emissions of the power sector will not drop as you are expecting it to be. So emissions in power sector are 50% today. They could have been 30% of India's, but they're still 50% because 20% of your power is getting wasted, right? You're essentially, you're not able to integrate renewable properly, and unless your emissions on the energy side are reduced, transportation cannot do too much. India's only 10% emissions are by transport. In that 10% also is 2% two-wheelers, three-wheelers, 2% four-wheelers, cargo, LCV, 6% is trucks and buses. So even if you end up electrifying the entire two-wheeler, four-wheeler, you can only make 4% dent in India. You first need to make the intercity trucks, buses, those guys electric. That is where you make the 66% dent. And what you really need to do is rest of it, aggregate the capacity, build the right storage, and bring down that 50% of the energy sector. So that's, I mean,
so going after just electrifying transport itself, even if you do it all, it's only 10%. Yeah. And you're saying you really have to go after the production and the
storage side. You have to provide the infrastructure. Storage is in that infrastructure, but storage has a problem, right? You cannot. There are three big problems with it. Number one, you're not using it the whole day. You need only storage 4 hours a day at best, right? The capex is huge. The maintenance effort is huge, right? Payback periods of companies like Bloom Energy, right? There are many storage companies that are struggling to make money. And that is because the payback periods are coming out to be 5-6 years. There's, of course, a way you can say that subsidies can be there and all, but that's not a sustainable solution. The sustainable solution is, since you do not require the resource all the time, do not build a dedicated resource, build a network.
Got it. What would be your ask of other climate tech and sustainability entrepreneurs? Not necessarily electric mobility focused, but other folks in working across carbon waterways.
I'm solely focused on this broader sustainability landscape. I'm not really aware of that whole thing. I can only give gyan for that, but that would not be relevant.
What would you need from them? Like if you could be helped out in any way by other entrepreneurs?
I'll just ask them to keep on continuing working on whatever they are doing, because the more sustainability comes into the focus, the more capital we can attract as a country for sustainability. Today in India, in 2021, the amount of money invested in sustainability by private markets was the total VC funding done by India. Whatever we did in India was just the spend of the global markets in sustainability, right? So that is how big it has become, right? And that has not trickled down to India. So I think the more entrepreneurs come in, the more business models come in sustainability, there will be a consistent deal flow for the private markets, and that will definitely bring in India under a focus. So I think that will be my only ask from them. Just keep on.
Fortunately, capital is becoming far more abundant. I don't think it's a capital problem anymore. I think it's
it is not
business models with actual unit economics, right?
I don't think the capital is still that abundant. India has very tough unit economics, very, very tough. It's whenever you want to make a sustainable solution, you have to really understand the Paretos, navigate through the economics, understand where the economics really settle down. And doing that whole exercise is not an easy job. I mean, I'm telling you, we started working towards electric mobility in 2017. We first started building out Ninja Kawasaki kind of a version of electric bike, what ultraviolet and influx were trying to do. We realized that, okay, that's not scalable. That's not going to move the needle. We moved to batteries, figured out e-rickshaws, observed e-rickshaws for 2 good years. I mean, we have reached here today after a very long journey. So, I mean, experimentation cycles need to be faster, right? So I don't think the capital is available still at those levels where it should be.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you always want, there should always be more, right? Like, there should never be any scarcity.
At least for the right purpose, I think.
Yeah, for sure. What would be your ask of consumers? Like, think about it, right? Consumers are now going through this mind shift saying, I could have my first vehicle be an electric vehicle, right? Like, I literally cancel the last vehicle that I wanted, saying I'm going to wait for an electric vehicle to come that I may want, right? And I think that's going to become a far more default choice for people too. So what would be your ask of them?
Just be more critical. Just be a big time critic to everything that is coming out to India. I mean, the problem is that the supplier needs to evolve. I mean, all of us have pressure of growing. We have financial pressures. As we are running a company, we are running a business. But if the consumer starts accepting terrible products, the expectations fall apart, and then the entire category falls apart. So there has been this discussion many times that does EV work? Does EV make sense? I mean, is it a viable option? I mean, we have been asking these questions for centuries now. I mean, we need to really stop asking this question, because the customer needs to go very critical about it. If the quality of supply is not good, reject it. Right? That is when the suppliers will start evolving. That is when our quality metrics will start evolving. And instead of broadly broadcasting the entire technology as a useless technology, we'll be talking about the execution might not have been enough.
Got it. And to top it off from my side, assuming somebody is over here and is like really climate curious, sustainability curious, practices some other form of sustainability professionally, but doesn't know where to like even start with electric mobility and just wants to go deeper into the rabbit hole and like learn, right, in a really efficient way. What's like, is there a clear path you can recommend to say, okay, go from zero to, you know?
It's very tough to be I'll be very honest with. So I think the best way is just start talking to the market. I mean, I used to say this to my co-founders as well all the time, that market में बैठेंगे तो अपने आप समझ में आ जाएगा क्या है, right? So I think that is what is needed for sure, because there are a lot of things which are behind the covers, right? You do not get to know them unless you have done hands-on work on them. Otherwise, data points are very misleading, right? So that is where the difference is. But I think the starting point, of course, is one of the good resources is the dashboard of Center of Energy, Environment and Water. They have done some fabulous job around making dashboards around sustainable electric mobility, power and all. So you get to see the Paretos very, very clearly. And it's the Paretos where the opportunity lies. Right. So I think that can be a crash course for everyone to really start off.
Great starting point then. CEW's dashboard, right?
Yeah.
All right. We'll dive into questions now. I'm going to call on the order that it is in the chat box too. Webhub, if you can unmute and ask your question, and end it with a question mark, please. Not with a full stop. Webhub. We can circle back to you. Vijay, you want to go with yours?
Sure, Anirudh. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. And Ankit, that was a really insightful presentation. Too many questions popped up. I wouldn't ask all of them, but I just want to ask a few important ones. Some may be directly relevant, but some you may be aware of. So the first question is, with batteries becoming the main storehouse and, storage of the power being generated, is there anything being done towards, because we're trying to make this sustainable, right? So is there anything being done towards the battery waste management as well? Because it's going to boom in a way, just as people keep saying, solar is the next big thing, but in a few years, solar EVs are going to become a nuisance, just as polythenes became, right? So just like that, batteries are going to become a nuisance quite shortly. So is there anything being done around the battery waste management itself, which you're aware of? It may not be a direct cup of tea, but is there something which you can throw light on that aspect too?
Got it. So Vijay, battery, I mean, so there is incentive for stakeholders to manage batteries, because after the first life, there is an opportunity of second life. After second life, there's an opportunity of extracting the raw materials out of it. So the companies already have an incentive of doing waste management. All we have to do is on the regulator side, if we are rolling out subsidy, if we are giving PLI, we are giving all those things, just make sure that your PLIs are working and that whatever capacity is coming out is coming back to the plant as well. So I think the stakeholders already have the incentive. On the regulatory side, all we need to do is make sure there is significant amount of checks put onto the people who are getting this subsidy, because these people who are getting the subsidy are going to be the one creating the capacity out there and putting all that cells which need to come back to their plants and then taken apart and used for something else, and then taken apart for use something for else. So there are companies working on it. There are startups also. There is this startup called Loham. They are doing pretty great in terms of their positioning, in terms of their scale in this segment in circular life. And I think circular life as a story itself, circular life as a proposition itself has gained a lot of traction in Nordic countries. And Norway is like Norway, Sweden, Poland. The Nordic countries are my template for innovation. I mean, everything is happening out there fastest, right? Mm-hmm. So there are a lot of companies that you can refer to understand how you can monetize or build your proposition on top of circular life, right? So, but there is definitely a clear opportunity. The stakeholders are already aware of it. They are definitely going to use it. It won't be left aside.
Great, Ankit. Just one other question, if you don't mind. We spoke about generation and storage, right? So there is this concept of decentralized power generation as well, so that you just don't need to. So at the end of the day, using EVs is like shifting the emission from the city to the power plant, unless and until we move that also to the green zone, right? So and instead of and in the power grid, there is a significant chunk. I'm not sure of the exact figure, but it's definitely not negligible. Maybe 30-40%, or maybe close to that, is wastage, transmission losses, people pulling power from the grid and stuff like that. Whereas a decentralized power generation would significantly cut down on those losses and generate power just to what is required, right? So is there anything around that little bit which you can share?
So there is this one company by Onji Group in India called Simpa Energy. It is into rooftop, and not only rooftop, but also democratizing rooftop, right? So they are not only advocating that, okay, rooftop should be there, they're also advocating that everyone should do it, right? So rooftop is going to come in big time, right? Because it's a great commercial model to crowdsource real estate, to crowdsource. There are a lot of great things that are possible with it. Companies are working toward it. The only problem comes out to be storage, because the way energy markets function is that it doesn't make sense to build off-grid solutions. The capex becomes so high that your IRRs suffer a lot, right? So essentially, how it works is that you set up a plant, whether it's a utility scale plant, whether it's a rooftop plant. There is a platform on top of it that's aggregating that capacity and selling it in the energy markets via PPA. Now, the more energy markets become round the clock, the penalty of not being able to handle the power that is coming out from these sources will not only get subsidized by the regulator. Today, it is getting subsidized completely by the regulator. Regulator goes and pays off the power companies, the renewable power producers. I mean, discoms have to pay 43,000 crores to people, right? The regulators are subsidizing that. So the moment RTC starts coming in, the market will start penalizing the people who are not handling power properly. And that is how this opportunity of openly managing energy and providing services to manage energy also will start booming. I think that this feedback loop needs to be completed. Once the feedback loop is completed, then it's just a circle. It'll become well-oiled machinery. Will move faster and faster the more incentives grow into it.
Thank you so much.
Great. The next one is going to be from L. John. And Eljon, if you can also introduce yourself, because I don't think we've met yet.
Hi, I'm Lieutenant Colonel John. I'm also just interested in this circular economy and sustainability. So you're looking right now at using the spare battery or the unused battery right now. So what I was thinking is it possible to use the batteries which is connected to household inverters to store this energy? Because right now you would be targeting only the inverters companies who are manufacturing it. Is it possible to have some kind of a model where the inverter companies provide these with maybe an IoT device so that they charge the batteries only at the specific time, in the daytime using solar energy or at nighttime using wind energy? Is that possible?
That is very much possible. That's a very viable model also. The only thing is, and I'll give you one example. There's this company called Swell Energy, which basically has tied up with Tesla. They became a distributor of Tesla. They started selling their Powerwalls to people at a discounted price rate. So they became a distributor. They said, we'll give you 0% finance. We'll give you cheaper Powerwall. People bought it. They got the inverters, and then they told, okay, whenever your inverters are not working, I'll aggregate the capacity and sell it as a aggregated energy storage option to power players or to renewable developers, to discoms, to virtual power plant players. The only problem is to implement this in India, 24/7 power supply responsibility is a social responsibility. It's a regulator's responsibility today, right? So unless it comes over to the market, it will be very difficult to convince the consumer that, hey, you should put an inverter, or hey, you should put an inverter which is of this quality supply, or this is built out of this sustainable chemistry, right? So in India, to implement this strategy that you aggregate inverters, first, India needs to do away with the responsibility of 24/7 power access as a national duty. It needs to come over to the market. It needs to get baked into the way markets are structured. And then this strategy would start making a lot more sense.
Thanks.
Great question. Dr. Vasudha Hegde has a question too, if you're here. I actually love this one because even I've been very curious about it. Is vehicle to grid, V2G, just theoretical? You want to go in further in depth, Dr. Hegde?
No, Anirudh, that itself is a question. So is there any country which has already implemented it in a big scale, or what exactly is the status as of now? Because theoretically we say that vehicle to grid is possible, but there's definitely a big role played by the battery over there.
On this question, just check out VeveGrid also. I've dropped a link to it.
Yes. Yeah. So VeveGrid is already doing this in California. I'll answer it differently. It is not only theoretical, it is also being used in emergency. It is being used in emergency conditions now. So recently, I'm sure you must be all aware of the power outage that happened in California. The power outage, when it happened, basically it happened because the solar was at a utility scale over there. And in utility scale solar, for example, if a storm comes in a weather, there is a drastic change in weather, your entire solar plant, which is powering your state or something, like whole area, goes down. You do not have the capability of starting it up. It's called black start operations. You have to start the operations of production from zero. Now, this black start operations requires a ramp up. It requires some storage capacity. So what at this point of time Tesla did was they allowed their vehicles, they encouraged the consumers that had bought their vehicles to wire it back into the grid. So basically, at a time when the city was out of power because its solar plant was not generating power, the city pulled up its cars and used it to get the power production back up. So it not only it's practically possible, it is possible to use it even for emergency conditions. So it's reliable as well. Now, there are two parts to it which you really need to understand to build conviction around the fact that yes, it is practically possible. Number one, is the power transfer from the vehicle to the grid possible? And I'll answer it very straightforward. Your rooftop is possible, so vehicle to grid is possible. You're essentially in rooftop, you're putting power back onto the grid from a decentralized location. Same goes with vehicle also. The battery is simply putting power back on the grid. So as a power transfer, it is very much possible. Now comes the question is traceability of that power. I have put power at point A, someone else has put power point B, point C, point D. That whole accounting system is already there today. That is why we have open access. That is why we have the capability of aggregating that capacity and making it available to someone else, so that both the parties are at benefit. Who has the idle capacity are able to monetize it, and who doesn't have that and who wants idle capacity is able to use it at a pay-per-use model. So yeah, that's that.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. Just a 30-second interjection here. Ashna and Mridula, can I just ask you to put in a word about what we have next weekend as well? And then we'll go back to the questions.
Yeah, sure. So can I just share my screen and show you a bit about carbon dating that we have?
Yeah, just take 30 seconds for it. And then we'll go right back into the questions.
Yeah, sure.